There we go. Right. Hello. Welcome to the GigCX Decoded podcast, number 6 in the series, where we dive into the world of gig-based customer service, or GigCX as we call it. Brought to you by Limitless. I'm your host, Chris Dumpleton. I have the pleasure of leading the sales and marketing charge here at the good ship Limitless. And on this podcast, we're getting into more detail around gig-based customer experience. GigCX is our shortened version of that, and just as a quick introduction to what that is about enabling businesses to crowdsource customer support by routing digital inquiries to often crowds of their own customers to get rewarded on a per gig basis. So it's the Uber for the contact center world is my 30-second pitch summary when people ask what it's all about. And today, really excited, I've got Peter Ryan on the show. Peter, lovely to see you.
Hey, great. Thanks for having me on, Chris.
And we were just having a quick chit chat offline about the weather, and I think we're out-weathered you today. And you said you might have a dog appearing in the background, so maybe they can offer some insights as well.
Well, I don't know about appearing, but certainly he might make himself known, especially if the postman happens to knock, which he gets very excited about.
He does. Okay. Well, I'll talk to you another time about dogs. I've got a weird background in dog psychology. I know it's one of my specialised subjects. But anyway, that's not today. Today we're talking about customer service. So Peter, you're the president and principal analyst of Ryan Strategic Advisory. So rather than me do a bad job of talking about who that is and what it is, why don't you give the listeners a quick intro into you and what that business is all about?
Ryan Strategic Advisory was born 6 years ago. In fact, nearly 6 years to the day as we record this podcast, Chris. The idea behind my organization is that we work with stakeholders across the BPO and CX ecosystem to try and enable them to get closer to the market segments that they want to attack, to be able to identify the right opportunities, whether it's from the standpoint of geographies, technologies, or industries. But the whole idea is really to provide the insight and really, I think, the strategic penetration that so many organizations are looking for in order to stand out in what's become a very generic crowd across the customer experience management environment.
Okay, and you say that 6 years old, and how have you weathered the pandemic storm, and were you called more upon or less upon during that time?
It's interesting. Nobody really knew what was going to happen at the outset of March 2020. What I found was that the interest in CX and the interest in the services that my organization provides actually went up, which was great in many ways. I suppose the downside was, given the fact that we couldn't go anywhere, we couldn't do anything, taking any time off to regroup and to recharge was very difficult. But now that we seem to be heading towards what looks like a semblance of normalcy or a return to normalcy, I think that not just myself, but many different executives and many different organizations are looking to try and recalibrate and to find that balance once again.
Okay, good stuff. All right. Well, that's actually probably a nice segue into one of the first questions I had for you, actually, and it was an article I saw this morning on the FT, which, when you say you sort of return to normalcy, and I'm wondering if this is an indication of more global normalcy coming, but certainly from the Philippines. So the article goes something like this, and I'm just going to read off some of the aspects here, which was that the Philippine call centers win the battle to make remote work permanent. So, having read the article, it would appear now that the allowances for the percentages of those that were allowed to work from home and enable them to do that has now been removed. Did you see this article, or have I just curveballed you with it?
I think a lot of other destinations, governments are going to be thinking twice if they were considering the idea about putting some type of a restriction on the proportion of workers that can deliver CX remotely. To my mind, if the Philippines is going to move away from such regulation, it would just make sense that whether it's a state, a municipality, or a national government would look to think twice as well. The fact of the matter is that those destinations that have competitive labor markets and that are going to be as competitive as possible are the ones that are going to garner the most in regards to employment and in terms of long-term development of their economic and social strata. So as far as I'm concerned, this sets a very good precedent for other CX
Mm,
destinations that might have been thinking of putting some type of a proportion or a restriction on the number of people that could work remotely.
mm. Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, it's a nice sort of link into my next question, which really about wonder if this is primarily one of the reasons why they're doing this. But one of the biggest trends that we see in the contact center industry, and I'd be interested in your opinion on this, is the difficulty in finding talent, and not just your I'll be careful with my terminology. And actually, sorry, let me just paraphrase this, because my first ever job was in a contact center, right? So I don't say these words in a way to be derogatory in any way whatsoever, but the average contact center worker, right, often are doing it as first jobs, right? They are doing
Mm-hmm.
it to get onto the employment ladder and move into that world. They rarely have any form of affiliation to a brand or a industry, or profession. It can generally be one of those entry points in. So in that context, so my question again was around one of the biggest trends we're seeing is contact centers finding enough talent in the first place. What's your take on that particular problem? And do you think it's becoming harder just generally to find that vanilla level of talent, or more specialized talent in today's modern economy?
The talent's out there. The key is being able to attract the talent and attract the people who bring the right skills to the CX roles. And I think this is where a lot of contact centers have fallen down. And I mean, Chris, much like you, one of my first jobs as a part-time worker when I was in university was, funnily enough, working in a contact center.
Right.
And I was lucky because I had quite a fun environment and I quite
Mm-hmm.
enjoyed the people I worked with. Unfortunately, that experience isn't replicated across all individuals who've had the chance to be in some type of a CX role. In my opinion, if we're going to be driving the right people into the contact center, if we're going to be driving the right people who want to work in customer experience, we've got to find ways of making things challenging for them in a positive fashion. They can't just be going in to punch a card or to cash a paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be work that's meaningful. And I saw a really great presentation on this topic from Fifth Talent not long ago in Las Vegas at CX Outsourcers, where they were talking about the need to try and engage with individuals. The reality is people want to work. People want to go into some type of an employment environment, but they're not going to stay unless they're going to be put in a situation where they're stimulated. And I think that's where the contemporary contact center in many cases has fallen down. And until there's going to be a manner of addressing this, and until there's going to be some methodology put in place with centers that are facing these challenges to rectify this, they're just going to be dealing with churn, they're going to be dealing with attrition, and they're going to be dealing with this new phenomenon of quiet quitting.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, it's feedback we hear regularly from our clients. Finding them in the first place. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we exist, frankly, is to kind of challenge that paradigm of saying, rather than bring the people to the work, is take the work to the people, and the digital mechanisms that provide that communication, but also the nature of the work itself, not being asked to work in shifts and structured environments, be able to work on the fly in a gig way is a way that offers a different access to talent that may not have been able to be attracted in the first place. What's your take on GigCX? What do you think is the reasons why it's becoming more interesting, more topical now, and do you have any sort of direct feedback from anybody around that, or any particular observations based on the work that you've done?
Based on the work I've done, there's a lot of interest out there, both from the angle of the enterprises looking to try and engage a new way of delivering customer experience, as well as from the BPO community that I deal very heavily with in regards to being able to take advantage and leverage this new way of CX that's being brought to the table very, very aggressively the past few years. I think, Chris, for me, the thing that really sticks out for GigCX is it's not necessarily a chance to hire somebody who's going to be a typical CX agent, but really this is the harnessing of brand ambassadorship. Something that I really enjoy hearing about is when you talk to organizations that have leveraged gig, and they discuss how they're supporting a particular brand, and they put the clarion call out. Do you want to support a particular technology firm? Do you want to support a particular financial services firm or an e-commerce platform? You get people who are so enthusiastic that eat, breathe, and sleep these brands that they're supporting. They're
Right.
going to go the extra mile if they're going to be working in this GigCX manner. They're going to do everything they possibly can, not just to support the end client, but to make sure that that end client is going to come back and want to use that brand or to leverage that brand even more. Why? Because they are motivated, they're passionate about brands. And something I like to talk about with people, something I always ask about is what brands, if you were to think about 2 or 3 different brands you are absolutely in love with, what would they be? And it's funny, Chris, because everybody's got one. And this is where I see the advantage with a gig, especially. This business model has the chance to attract that type of individual who not just brings the right technical skills or maybe even CX skills, but brings that level of engagement with the brand where they're not just able to go the extra mile, but their level of depth of knowledge is that much further.
What would I'm going to ask you? You've set it up beautifully for me. What was your one product or brand that you would be an advocate for, an ambassador for?
That's a really good question. I'm going to give you a couple. From a financial services standpoint, obviously, much like yourself, I travel a lot, and I find American Express an invaluable credit card to hold. I think that it is an incredible company. If I contact them by telephone, I get through within 1 or 2 rings. They're always exceptionally well informed, very very, very good in terms of making sure that by the time you get off the telephone, your issue is going to be solved. And I mean, the points that they bring to the table, the access to airline lounges, it really can't be beat. Another brand I love, funnily enough, as you can see, Adidas. I'm a huge
There you
fan.
go. There you go.
Good quality clothes, and something I love about Adidas, it doesn't matter if it's the shoes or the shorts or the tops. I know my size. If I order anything online, it fits the first time out. I never have to send it back. I never have to take it back to the store.
Excellent. Well, everyone, and it's funny you say that. I mean, like you say, everyone has just that personal relationship. But the thing that for me that this provides is this. It sometimes, contact centers often work in a world of just objective KPIs and metrics. That constant seesaw of, demand comes in. If there wasn't any demand in contact centers normally are designed and sized based upon a relationship towards how much is being sold. So the forecast for what's going to be come through the front door in terms of sales is like, well, we anticipate now there being this type of aftercare required from it, and they often get budgets, and those budgets then determine, right, well, we've got to handle this amount of contact, but we've got to try and get to this level of CSAT, and there's your seesaw. Is the constant balance between cost and CSAT, and that world lives in metrics around speed of answer and handle time and first call resolution and NPS scores, and there are so many objective metrics that everybody scorecards everywhere in your face. But the one thing that's quite hard to objectify is this word, empathy, right? And it's this sort of ethereal thing that floats around, but we all know, because we can relate to it as humans, that would you rather, this is the killer question I always sort of ask people. I mean, it's teed up, but I don't think anybody can argue it, which is that would you rather, if I've got a technical question about a product, would I rather talk to someone who's got that product versus someone who doesn't? And as long as the answer is, well, not as long as the answer is, but the perspective I would put on that would be, well, as long as they can still give me the technical answer, then great. But also, of course, I'd love to talk to someone who's got it, because they can say, yeah, I've got your thing, isn't it great? By the way, have you heard about this? Here's what I did, and yeah, there is that little bug, and there is this little thing, but here is my experience, and that is just like you walking into a pub or a bar or something. You meet someone and go, oh, I've got this thing. Oh, I've got one of those. Have you? Oh, let me ask you a few questions. And you ask someone, and they just offer their help, because it taps into that readership, or that person that, like you say, when they've already made the decision to buy the brand on their own volition, and then they get asked whether they would also like to represent that brand to be able to offer other customer service for others. That distilled into the interaction, that 30-second, 2-minute interaction with someone who's asking a question, and they come out of that going, I really related to that person because they've got my thing. But where do you put that on a scorecard? And I don't know if that's a question, just what's your view on that?
But it's so true. And I mean, everything you've just said makes sense. We've all had an experience where we've been in a restaurant or a pub or a bus or a train. We can't do something on our telephone. We look over to the person sitting across from us. Do you know how to make this adjustment on the iPhone or on the
Right.
Samsung? And 9 times out of 10, you're going to find somebody actually knows how to do this. And that's just learning through experience. But it's also learning through people who are passionate about the different products and services that they're using. And a telephone is just one of them. Ask yourself about how many times you've looked for travel advice if you're flying on a particular airline, and exactly what you need to do in order to get the best seat assignment. Or if you're looking to try and get an upgrade, odds are you're going to call somebody who in your network who knows what they're doing. And this is what I love about the idea around empathy. It's the fact that it's not just somebody who is being paid to assist, but it's somebody who wants to assist, somebody who wants to impart that level of knowledge. And this is what I love about the idea about brand ambassadorship. It takes CX to a whole new level. The idea that you really believe that you are representing a particular organization, that you're representing a brand, and that you want to almost, for lack of a better term, evangelize that brand through great support, and to make sure that people want to try and reinforce their relationship with that brand.
And if I mean, most people listening to this, and we would all recognise that, in the world out there at the moment, there are community forums, right? Which is that, and everyone can relate to that. Now, if you look at the kind of characteristics of a community forum, it's people that have already let's say 9 times out of 10 have got the product, or they've had the product, right? Because they would need to be able to say, yes, I can answer that inquiry. It's digital because it's on a forum out there, and they've got to type in answers, and they do it on their own free time. Now, all those things are what and everyone who gets the right answers in that would absolutely love it, and there's real empathy in that. The problem I would say CX leaders may have around that as a dependable channel or resource model is the fact that you are completely reliant on people's free will, and often some of them are policed, or there's some sort of federation in there, and sort of management, but often a lot of them can go a bit rogue, and people and it's not something you can typically attach service level metrics around. So you can't. It's a wonderful thing because it takes a lot of demand out, and the demand it takes out is delivered real empathy, as we've just discussed, but isn't something in there. But everyone can relate to that. Now, for me, what GigCX is doing is it's taking all those core values, but because you put on top of it that you get rewarded for your time, you tap into dependability, scalability, and performance, so you can then start to actually bring the benefits of a community forum-esque approach, but also the ability for people to say, I want to work in this way, and I want to be able to get rewarded for my time, not just because I'm now not just doing it as a hobby, it's now a thing, and then you become more reliant on that. Out of interest, do you think, I've got 2 questions for you as we approach the end. The first one is, do you think GigCX is the wrong term? Do you think gig is the wrong term? Do you think there's a stigma associated with it? That's one question, by the way.
So if we were having this conversation 12, 18 months ago, I might have been more inclined to say yes, gig might not be the right expression. Let's be perfectly frank, Chris. There were some issues around gig working in terms of perception, especially as various governments in different parts of Western Europe as well as North America started bringing in particular elements of legislation as it related to the gig business model. I think that that's largely dissipated now. I don't mind the term gig. I think that gig works because people understand what we're talking about, but I think we need to be very careful here. we need to be very, very careful in the sense when we're talking about a brand ambassador using the gig business model, that's very different from somebody delivering food or picking
Right.
somebody up and driving them somewhere. Taking nothing away from that work. It's very honest work and very admirable, but this is taking it to a whole new level. To my mind, gig is a descriptor that almost everybody will understand. They'll have a basic idea of the concept. You're not going to need to re-educate them. You might need to explain what some of the nuances and the particulars are, but the reality is, in terms of a starting point, it's something that most people will comprehend.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I'm always intrigued because sometimes you get drunk on your own juice when you talk about it all the time, and I'm always interested to hear what other people think. So, last question as we approach the end of this conversation is, what do you think prevents CX leaders from adopting a gig-based customer service model?
What's preventing them from adopting this model, I think, is just perhaps a lack of a familiarity with how it works and how it can benefit their business. It's certainly, I think, in a much better position today than it was even 6-7 months ago. And we're seeing the work that Limitless is doing, as well as other providers who are in the market. The more organizations that bring the gig model in a credible fashion to the UK, to the USA, to Western Europe, to Canada, to Australia, New Zealand, this is going to make, I think, the concept a lot more palatable. Because, Chris, look, let's be perfectly frank. We work in an industry in CX that's very much denoted in terms of follow the leader. A lot of organizations don't want to be the ones who are going to break new ground. They want somebody else to do it. They want somebody else to prove that a business model is going to work. Then they'll jump on board. And I don't think that this is any different. The good news is when you talk to the enterprise community that are working with BPOs that are using gig or that are deploying gig themselves, they're really satisfied with it. They really like it. They see the net benefit. And let's be frank, people talk to each other. There's lots of conferences happening. As you say, there's lots of forums that people follow on the internet. And the more good news stories about gig that come out, the more likely is that that pie is going to be expanded over the long term.
This is dangerous if you've never heard of this, but have you ever seen that classic video on YouTube of the dancing man on the hill? Is at that big festival. There's a guy dancing all on his own, and then everyone's looking at him thinking that's a bit of a freaky guy, and then one guy goes and joins him and starts dancing, and then before 2 minutes later, the entire field is dancing. And I mean, hopefully GigCX will have that, and maybe it's me out there doing the dancing, but no, it's of course our customers, and we're very privileged to have the likes of Microsoft and Sony and Dell and HP and eBay, Samsung. We've got these amazing brands that are all being that equivalent of those first dancing men on the hill. But anyway, that's a big segue into a different topic. But
Chris, you're raising something here that I think is really important, in the sense that there are established brands out there. That form part of our lives. I mean, I think about the number of products I've got from Samsung in my own house, and I've got several. If somebody works in CX, the fact that I've got Samsung products, I think very highly of them, and that they're using GigCX, that reinforces the business model to me, because it's a brand I take seriously. And I think when you list the litany of different organizations you've just spoken about, I mean, imagine the credibility that brings the business model over the long term, as more and more leaders across the enterprise community are going to hear about it.
Often we need to remind ourselves of that as well. And the other thing, I think, for anyone listening to this, is the level of diligence that you can imagine those organizations went through. If there's any concerns around how this model works from a protection of workers and employment status and infosec and all of that stuff that can often be the thing, if there's any of those reasons why those organizations are not doing it, then as I like to say, we've done the Pepsi challenge with all of those, and they're all experiencing the benefits. But there we go. Enough of my
you do realize you just dated yourself very massively.
I can't help it. I have these things, and they come out a lot. But there we go.
I love it. I think it's a great way of. I love that expression, the Pepsi challenge. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, and and every time I say that, people just go immediately, and they can remember that advert, and it's. But there we go. Yeah. But brilliant. Anyway, right. Well, we could dive into adverts, but that's another topic. Peter, thank you for joining the show. As always, it's lovely to see you. Thank you for your insights. And for those listening, listen out for episode 7, next episode. And if you want to know more about GigCX, the best place is on our website. The whole report that we've referenced is in there, where you get to hear about from people like Peter, from our experts, from other customers out there thinking about GigCX. But for now, stay tuned, and we'll speak to you on the next podcast. Take care.
Thanks.